The Laval archetype is a series of fire monsters with effects built around utilizing the graveyard, following in the footsteps of fan-favorite archetypes such as Lightsworn and Volcanics. However, the Laval archetype flopped massively on release, unable to muster a competitive viable strategy. Today, we're going to investigate this fiery strategy more closely and examine why it failed to convert. The Laval archetype has a couple of themes, one of which is effects that can only be used if you have enough differently named Laval monsters in your graveyard. The deck also has many cards and effects meant to satisfy this condition, such as several of their tuner monsters sending cards from your hand to the graveyard on summon. The deck has a focus on synchro summoning, with most of its boss monsters being synchro monsters. Though the deck does have the extremely powerful and now unfortunately banned Laval Volchain, an Xyz monster that can send monsters from the deck directly to the graveyard. Additionally, many of the deck's monsters have exactly 200 defense, allowing them to be summoned back with Rekindling, a normal spell that lets you summon any number of fire monsters with exactly 200 defense from your graveyard. This synergizes perfectly with Laval's focus on having a stocked graveyard, which you think would set this deck up for success. However, none of this really worked out for a variety of reasons. But a big one was that the effects of each of the individual Laval monsters just weren't worth the downsides associated with playing them. And before we go on to the next spot, I need to show you something real quick, because this actually surprised me. First off, Raid's CG quality is always insane. Like, they never miss. And somehow I only just realized that the Iron Twins are actually two robots back to back. I've been fighting them almost every day for a year and never really noticed that until now. This is all part of Raid's Assassin's Creed collaboration, and they went all out. You've got Yugioh, Edward Kenway, Bayek, Basm, and Cassandra, who is the first champion from Raid's newest faction, the Archetypes. All fully playable, and the designs are super faithful to Assassin's Creed. The outfits, the animations, everything just fits. And as far as free legendaries go, Yugioh is scary. I always ban enemy Yugiohs in live arena because he absolutely melts my stone skin users. You can get him completely free through the Yugioh Chase event, and continue logging in for another 7 days to keep the rewards flowing with gear to help Yugioh get up to speed quickly. And there's also a new event dungeon with its own antagonist that actually adds real gameplay, not just skins. Now personally, I play Raid every day. I love the high-end gameplay and the endless customization. The end game is genuinely hard, which makes pushing champions, gear, and tournaments actually feel rewarding. It's pretty much the same reason I play Yu-Gi-Oh over other card games. I just enjoy the high-end complexity. Now, the bonuses. New players with my code get a free legendary Narmother Returned, plus the epic Mausoleum Mage, and you can also grab Yugioh for free just for logging in during the event. On top of that, you can choose one of 6 promo codes for a free legendary: Cheshire Cat, Alice, Sun Wukong, Ultimate Death Knight, Green Warden Ruark, and Razzlevarg. Personally, Cheshire Cat is probably the strongest, but they're all really good. If you join, my username is TheDuelLogs, and join my clan Heroes Cool Squad. We need strong, high-level players for Siege mode, and I really want some of that feral gear. So scan the QR code on screen to start, and let's get back to the next spot. To see why, we're going to have to take a bit of a closer look at the individual Laval monsters. Since this is a synchro strategy, we'll be starting by taking a look at its tuner lineup. First off is Laval Volcano Handmaiden. This is a level 1 Fire Pyro with 100 attack and 200 defense. It has the effect where, when this card is sent to the graveyard, if you have a Laval monster besides Handmaiden in your grave, you can send a Laval monster from your deck to the graveyard. This card is meant to help fill your graveyard with various Lavals for future plays, as well as letting you turn on your other Laval effects. A trend you'll see in that many of the deck's tuners have effects when sent to the graveyard, which synergizes when using them for synchro summons. Or at least it would if these weren't when effects, meaning that they can miss timing. And since this sort of effect happens on several of the Laval tuners, many of them have the same problem. The next tuner is Laval Lakeside Lady. This is a level 3 Fire Pyro with 200 attack and defense. It has the effect where if this card is in your graveyard, and you have 3 or more Laval monsters in your graveyard with different names, you can banish this and another Laval monster from your grave to target a set card your opponent controls and destroy it. Lakeside Lady was a card that was a lot better at its time of release, as setting both spell and trap cards as well as monster cards was much more common, making having a form of removal attached to one of your tuner monsters a lot more valuable. Next is Laval Forest Sprite, a level 2 fire tuner with 300 attack and 200 defense. It has the effect where, when it's sent to the graveyard from the field, All of your Laval monsters gain 200 attack for each Laval monster in your graveyard until the end of the turn. Forest Sprite both misses timing and has an effect that isn't super useful. This can be a great attack boost that allows you to find lethal in a lot of situations, especially late into the game. But thanks to how difficult it is to actually get this effect to work, with it missing timing and all, it's not really worth taking into consideration. The most consistent way to activate this effect would be to crash it into your opponent's monster on purpose, and having a board state where you can safely do that, with Lavals on field to give the attack boost to, and enough Lavals engraved to make the attack boost meaningful, is a real nice once in a blue moon scenario. Then we have Soaring Eagle Above the Burning Land. This is a level 1 Fire Wing Beast with 100 attack and no defense. It has the effect where, if this card is sent to the graveyard for a Synchro summon, and you have 3 or more different Laval monsters in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your graveyard, but banish it when it leaves the field. Soaring Eagle is a potentially strong card that's difficult to make use of. Not being a Laval monster itself means it doesn't work with a lot of deck support cards, and it unfortunately can't really special summon itself from the grave unless it was already summoned by other means. The lack of ways to cheat it into play means that, while it can be used to Synchro climb from Laval Dragon into Laval the Greater for example, it's a very inconsistent card for comboing with. The final tuner monster in the deck is Laval Coatl. This is a level 2 Fire Pyro monster with 1300 attack and 700 defense. It has the effect where, if you have 3 or more differently named Laval monsters in your grave, you can special summon this card from your hand. Coatl is a strong playmaker on later turns, but here we see an issue with the archetype poking up for the first time, which is that the restriction of needing Laval monsters in your graveyard to activate their effects is actually really inconvenient. You would most want this effect to activate during the earlier turns of the game, as that's when you're more likely to be able to use it to make synchro plays, but that's when you're less likely to have enough monsters in your graveyard for it to work. With that, we've seen all of the deck's tuner monsters, and unfortunately they do leave a couple of things to be desired. The tuner monsters are generally both poor normal summons, and generally have poor swarming ability, making your strategy of swarming the board with synchros very difficult. This isn't helped by the non-tuner monsters in the archetype. There are 2 monsters that can special summon themselves or another monster in the deck, Laval Cannon and Laval Burner. Cannon can special summon another Laval monster from your banishment when it's normal or flip summoned, and Burner can special summon itself from your hand if you have 3 or more Laval monsters with different names in your graveyard. These cards can help you make some powerful synchro plays, but they aren't enough to make up for the rest of the deck's weaknesses. The deck is both normal summon reliant and doesn't have too many normal summons that actually keep up with the other decks are trying to do at the time. While other decks had normal summons such as Medulce Mageline and Traptrix Myrmelio, which allowed you to add cards from your deck to your hand on normal summon, or cards such as XX Saber Emmer's Blade, which float into the monsters when they're destroyed, Laval normal summons did very little. Laval Blaster could mill up to 5 random cards on its normal summon, but only if you already had a Laval monster in your graveyard. Laval Magma Cannoneer just lets you pitch fire monsters from your hand to burn your opponent for 500 damage, which is generally overvalued as an effect and certainly not worth an entire card. These are just a couple of the relevant examples. But in general, the Laval archetype has very few monsters that allow it to generate any sort of advantage. In general, the effects of the Laval monsters were just okay across the board, which creates a pretty big problem since so many of their effects are locked behind having multiple Laval monsters in your graveyard. Laval Warrior requires you to have a level 4 Laval monster with different names in your graveyard to have its effects, and cards such as Laval Judgment Lord require you to banish a Laval from your graveyard to activate its effect. In a vacuum, this is completely fine if the effect you get for jumping through these hoops is worth it, but the effects of both of these cards are simply burn damage. In general, the effects of the Laval cards very rarely meaningfully interact with the board or further your game plan. Effects that interact with the game and further a deck's game plan are almost always cards that move other cards to other zones, in the broadest of terms. This can be sending cards from the deck to the grave or adding them from the deck to hand, but it can just as easily be cards that move your opponent's cards to their graveyard or to their hand. This allows you to either get closer to actually making your boss monsters, or whatever the individual goal of your deck is, or to stop your opponent from doing so. This is how most games of Yu-Gi-Oh! Are won or lost, but that's not to say any other card effects are inherently bad. Burn damage and attack gains can be powerful effects, mostly when used as a way to end games or to control the battle phase. The Laval archetype has these types of effects in spades. Not only cards such as Prominence, Molten Swordsman that can boost their attack on their own, but they also have cards like Molten Whirlwind Wall that give their monsters an extra 100 attack for each level monster in your grave. These types of effects can allow the deck to dominate the battle phase, turning their monsters into removal and controlling the game that way. The issue is twofold. The first half being this is extremely easy to shut down. Since the deck doesn't have a ton of cards that generate direct card advantage, spot removal is particularly effective against it. In order to get around this, a deck needs powerful protection effects. A very obvious and recent example of this is Tenpai. This deck has the field spell Sangan Summoning, which makes it so that your Fire Dragon monsters are unaffected by your opponent's card effects during your main phase 1. This protection allows Tenpai to perform powerful OTKs through a ton of hand traps in the modern day, despite the fact that the deck has less direct ways to interact with the opponent than most other decks. Lavals have basically no cards that fill anything even approaching this role, leaving it very weak to interaction. The second big issue is that even if this is the deck strategy, it still needs some amount of support to be able to actually pull any of this off. Even if Lavals just wanted to be a deck built around burn damage and attack boosting, it would still need a way to consistently find and play the cards that enable this playstyle. And Lavals just don't quite have that. They do have Molten Conduction Field and Laval Miller, which each send 2 Laval monsters from their deck to the graveyard, but none of their cards let them get any particular cards from their deck to their hand, and Laval Cannoneer is one of the only ways the deck has to get its banished cards, or cards from its graveyard, back in rotation. This leaves the deck without many ways to find the particular cards it needs for any situation, leaving it with relatively few teeth. This is a good time to talk about the spell and trap support the deck received, as it's simultaneously powerful in many aspects while also not at all what the deck needed. We've already talked about Molten Whirlwind Wall and Molten Conduction Field, and neither of those cards have any effects besides the ones we mentioned. So next up is Dustflame Blast. This is a normal trap card with the effect where you banish all Laval monsters from your graveyard. Then you can destroy up to that many cards on the field. This is a powerful trap card in many ways, but it synergizes horribly with the deck itself. While some of the deck's monsters do want monsters to be banished, far more of the monsters prefer to have as many Lavals in the graveyard as possible. So while Dustflame Blast can be an incredibly powerful card, you really don't want to activate it unless it's likely to win the game. In a similar vein, Searing Firewall is a quick play spell, which banishes any number of level monsters from your grave to special summon that many level 1 Laval tokens in defense position. These can be used as synchro or tribute fodder thanks to the lack of restrictions on them, but it does have quite a large cost associated with it. It doesn't banish all of your Laval monsters, so it isn't completely backbreaking. Still, you have to be quite careful when using it to not banish too many Laval monsters. The final piece of the spell and trap card support the deck received was Burgeoning Wild Flame. This is a counter trap with the effect where, when a trap card is activated, you can send a Laval monster from your hand to the grave to negate that card's effects and destroy it. While this card is in your grave, you can banish 2 fire monsters from your graveyard to add this card back to your hand. Wild Flame has a lot going for it, as a counter trap that negates an opponent's card that you can return repeatedly is extremely powerful. Even being restricted to only countering traps alone wouldn't kill the card outright. However, the fact that you have to have a Laval monster in hand to send to the grave each time essentially kills the card outright. Not only does this mean it can never generate card advantage, but it synergizes horribly with the deck thanks to how few ways Lavals have to get their monsters back. This is a problem that only gets worse when we take a look at the final important card type of the deck. It's extra deck monsters. The most impactful Laval extra deck monsters is Laval Chain, which we've discussed earlier in this video. To quickly go over this card, this is a rank 4 Fire Sea Serpent that requires any 2 level 4 monsters to make. Once per turn, you can detach an Xyz material from the card to activate one of its 2 effects. You can either send any card from your deck to the graveyard, or choose a monster in your deck and place it on top of your deck. The first effect is the important one here, as there are a ton of cards that have powerful effects in the graveyard. Mezuki, any Tearlament monster, Fairy Tale Snow, Jet Synchron, the list goes on and on. In fact, there are so many cards outside of Laval that want to be sent to the graveyard that Chain was significantly better in non-Laval decks than it was in Lavals. This was pretty common back in the day when few extra deck monsters were locked into their own archetype, but this is a pretty big hit to Lavals as a strategy. A rank 4 that allows them to send a card like Volcanic Handmaiden or Lakeside Lady to the graveyard whenever they need them would have done a lot to boost the deck's consistency, but unfortunately, Chain was simply too powerful for its own good. Next we have Laval Ignis. This is a rank 3 Fire Warrior which requires any 2 level 3 monsters and has 1800 attack and 1400 defense. If this card attacks or is attacked, you can detach an Xyz material to give it 500 attack until the end of the turn. Ignis is a pretty underwhelming Xyz monster. While it can be useful for attacking over important monsters, it's not the best Xyz monster for that role. Cards like number 20 Giga Brilliant and Dante have effects that allow them, or in number 20's case your entire board, to have a ton of attack and require the exact same materials to summon. Overall, Ignis isn't an amazing piece of support, but that's fine as Laval decks can simply rely on generic options for its job. Onto the deck's several Synchro monsters. First, we have Laval Dragon. This is a level 6 Fire Dragon with 2500 attack and 1200 defense, and requires a tuner and one or more non-tuner fire monsters to summon. It has the effect where once per turn, you can add a Laval monster from your deck to your hand, then send a Laval monster from your hand to the graveyard. Dragon is a good consistency booster, but having that kind of effect on a level 6 Synchro is a little bit too late. Having a way to get your monsters into your hand or your graveyard is very powerful for such a graveyard-focused deck. However, this is another example of a problem we've seen with the Laval archetype. Namely, the deck has very few ways to actually generate card advantage. While Dragon does find more cards for you, the interaction is always card neutral. Combining this with the fact that it requires at least 2 cards to ever summon Dragon, and the card often runs you out of resources more often than not. Next, we have 2 similar Laval monsters, Laval the Greater and Laval Stenon. Laval the Greater is a level 6 Synchro that requires a tuner and a non-tuner fire monster to summon, and it has the effect where, when this card is Synchro summoned, you must send a card from your hand to the graveyard. If this card would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish a Laval monster from your graveyard instead. Laval Stenon is a level 7 Fire Synchro that requires 1 tuner and a non-tuner fire monster. This card also makes you send a card from your hand to the graveyard when it's Synchro summoned, and if this card is targeted by an opponent's card effect, you banish a Laval monster from your grave, negate the activation, and then destroy that card. These are both large Synchro monsters with a form of protection, which is completely fine, but for some reason they also have additional downsides that they simply didn't need. Not only having to use a tuner and another non-tuner monster to summon these Synchro monsters, but you also have to get rid of an extra card in your hand, meaning you're giving up at least 3 cards to make these rather middling Synchro monsters. This puts them more on par with higher level Synchros that often have far more impactful effects, who also usually require more than just 2 cards to summon. However, these Synchro monsters really don't have powerful enough effects to justify this high of a cost, as they're not too much better than Synchro monsters with similar levels and less downsides. The final 2 Laval Synchro monsters are Laval Dual Slasher and Laval Dragon. Dual Slasher is a level 5 Fire Warrior monster with 2500 attack. It requires 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner fire monster to summon, and gains effects based on the number of Laval monsters in your graveyard. If you have at least 2 Lavals in grave, it gains the effect where if it destroys a defense position monster in battle, it can attack again immediately afterwards, but only once per turn. If you have 3 or more Lavals in grave, then this card inflicts piercing battle damage. Dual Slasher isn't the best card ever, but it's fine for what Lavals want to do. It's a powerful attacker that can do a lot of damage and control the battle phase quite easily with the help of something like Molten Whirlwind Wall. It's nice to have access to, and can let the deck steal games in some board states. Laval Dragon is more impressive. This is a level 5 Dragon Synchro with 2000 attack and 1100 defense, which requires 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner fire monster. It has the effect where you can shuffle 2 Laval monsters from your grave into your deck to target a card your opponent controls, and return it to the hand. This is not a once per turn effect, by the way, so you can use this as many times as you have cards in the graveyard to fuel it. This can allow you to go for huge OTKs or just to respond to a scary board from your opponent. It's comparable to extremely powerful Synchro monsters such as Bryonic, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, except it doesn't require getting rid of cards in your hand to use its effect. If this card was at all easier to take advantage of, it would probably have seen quite a bit of play, but being restricted to the weak Laval archetype was simply too harsh to save it. With most of the individual cards covered, the failings of the archetype are pretty clear. As we said earlier, the Laval archetype suffers from a lack of card advantage and effects that meaningfully interact with the board or further your game plan. Its focus on burn damage and attack gains leave it with an aggressive playstyle that it doesn't have the explosive starts or consistency to follow up on, and lack of ways to protect its monsters or recover them leaves it very susceptible to most common forms of interaction. This was the state the deck was left in for many years, but it recently received a few pieces of support to help the deck be more competitive. These cards, Laval Archer, Laval Salamander, and Laval X-Lord, are some of the most powerful cards in the archetype, but they weren't enough to make it competitive. Taking a closer look, Laval Archer is a level 4 Fire Pyro with 1000 attack and 200 defense. If this card is normal summoned, you can perform an additional normal summon of a Laval monster this turn. You can only gain the effect once per turn. While it's in your grave, you can target a fire monster you control, destroy it, and special summon this card from your grave, but banish it when it leaves the field. This effect is also a hard once per turn. This is one of the most explosive normal summons in the deck, it being basically the only way the deck can make a Synchro monster on turn 1 in Engine. This is really important, as by the time this support came out, the pace of play increased massively, making putting up some sort of end board far more important. While Laval Archer is a big help to the deck's plays, it's simply not enough. It doesn't give the deck enough extension to get to a reasonable end board even without accounting for any interaction from the opponent. It's certainly no MathMech Circular, but it at least is a big help to the archetype. If the rest of its cards were of this quality, it may be able to perform as a suitable rogue deck. The next two monsters are Synchros, starting with Laval Salamander. This is a level 7 Fire Dragon Synchro that requires a tuner and a non-tuner fire monster to summon. When it's Synchro summoned, you may draw 2 cards. And if you do, you either have to send 2 cards from your hand to the grave, including a fire monster, or reveal your hand and shuffle it into your deck. It also allows you to banish a fire monster from your grave to flip monsters your opponent controls up to the number of Laval monsters you control face down. Salamander is a fine card, but on its own, not really enough. The ability to cycle through cards is appreciated, but once again, it doesn't actually generate any advantage for the archetype. And at this point, you have to wonder if Konami made it a rule or something that Lavals could never get a +1 attached to their cards. The second effect is a nice form of interaction, as it doesn't target and can hit multiple of your opponent's cards. But it isn't quick effect, which is a huge downside. It also doesn't really set you up for greater OTKs, since only one of the Laval monsters has piercing battle damage. If this effect were slightly more pushed, it could have helped the archetype out, but it alone isn't enough. And finally, we have Laval X-Lord. This is a level 8 Fire Warrior Synchro with 2900 attack and 200 defense. It requires a tuner and a non-tuner fire to summon, and it has the effect where, when your opponent activates a monster effect of a card on field or in their hand, you can inflict 1000 damage to your opponent and destroy that card. Additionally, if this Synchro Summon monster is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can special summon up to 3 non-Synchro fire monsters with 200 defense exactly from your graveyard and defense position, but their effects are negated. This is a legitimately good boss monster. It interacts with the opponent in a powerful way during both players' turns, and has a great floating effect that will allow you to have more follow-up if your opponent outs the card. But unfortunately, this card basically does nothing for Lavals, because it's a level 8 Synchro. The highest level Laval tuner is level 3, and your best extender is Laval Archer, which gives you an extra normal summon. The best you can do in this scenario is make a level 7 Synchro, and Lavals don't have any Synchros that can let them climb to a level 8 Synchro. This would have been fine if this was earlier in the game's lifespan, but these support cards were released a full decade after the original Lavals, and at that point, you have to have meaningful turn 1 plays to compete. You still have to rely on something like Rekindling to make a play, because Konami forbid Laval players don't have to build their entire decks around an unsearchable, non-archetype spell card. Just like Laval Chain before it, if X-Lord ever gets a spot in the limelight, it's likely not to be in Laval decks thanks to its fairly generic materials. So that's the Lavals. The most successful card from the archetype wasn't even that good in its own archetype. Konami seemed to mistakenly put restrictions on effects based on the graveyard as being graveyard synergy when designing the deck, and overall the deck feels as if it has very little direction. There was never really a game plan for Lavals, just a bunch of half-baked ideas and support cards that sort of look like they work together if you squint. It's overall just a poorly conceptualized deck that would need an entire rework to actually make playable, not only in the modern day, but even when it was first released. And don't forget, scan the code or click the link and claim your free champions before it's too late.